Started here in just a few moments as we allow everybody to get logged in. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Quad Cities Chamber's Legislative Event Series. My name is Jake Ford. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Quad Cities Chamber. Thank you for joining us this morning. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please, as always, keep an eye out for our e-news that will keep you updated on the latest happenings at DC, Springfield, and Des Moines, and here locally. Like what you need to know from the American Rescue Plan, or what you need to know as a business leader when it comes to getting your employees vaccinated. Our newly launched bill tracker page on the Chamber website also provides information on bills that are pertinent to our region and our members and business community. And those will also match our regional advocacy priorities that we launched at the start of the year. If you do have questions on any of those bills, there is a contact form that you can fill out. We're happy to answer any questions on bills in Illinois or Iowa. Today's event is sponsored by our Legislative Series annual sponsors, AM General LLC, Arconic, Exelon Generation, and Stanley Consultants. Thank you again for joining us and supporting this important chamber program. Today, joining us is U.S. Representative Mariannette Miller-Meeks, the newest member of our Quad Cities congressional delegation. In 2010, Governor Terry Branstad appointed her as the director of the Iowa Department of Public Health, where she served until 2014. Then in 2018, the voters of the State Senate District 41 in Iowa elected Miller-Meeks to be their representative in the state Senate. She resigned from the state Senate in 2021 to take her seat in the House of Representatives. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate being with you. I appreciate all of the sponsors who helped to make this program a reality. And like you, which we said just prior to coming on, I look forward to the time when we're actually meeting in person and not over a video feed, although it's been productive to be able to have this available to us. So I thank you for that, and thank you for hosting me.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to that as well. So I gave some of your recent history and kind of your elected office, but I know your path to running for office and to Congress was a little less traditional than others that we may have interviewed previously. So I'll let you kind of just introduce yourself to all of us, all of our members joining us today, and how you ended up representing them in the U.S. House.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, I do have a little bit of an unusual path. Politics was not what I started out to do. My family, I'm the fourth of 8 children. My father was a master sergeant in the Air Force. My mother had gotten a GED. We were very humble circumstances, traveled around the country, of course, with my father's military service. And neither of my parents were formally educated, but as many people in their generation were self-learned, very scholarly, very smart, intelligent people, and certainly wanted a college education for their children. When my dad was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, I was burned in a kitchen fire, actually my younger brother and I. And during that long hospitalization, decided that I was going to become a doctor. Now, I need to let you know that my aptitude test through middle school and beginning of high school said that I could be a bricklayer. So this was going to be a big leap to go from being a doctor. And no one in my family at that time had ever gone to college. My 2 older brothers went in the military, one to Vietnam, and one in the Green Berets, and then into the workforce. My older sister wanted to get married and have children. And so it was a little bit of a shocker that they had a child come and tell them that she wanted to be a doctor. They weren't sure how to navigate that and were very dissuasive, I would say, not persuasive. And part of that was they just didn't know how I would navigate being able to go to medical school when college seemed far-fetched but desirable. So my father got reassigned back to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, where I had some other surgeries for my burns. And I decided to leave home at 16, enrolled in San Antonio Junior College. So I actually started out at community college, was working, and was able to get a degree in nursing, a master's in education, ultimately go to medical school. And then I came to Iowa to do my ophthalmology residency at one of the best programs in the country. Throughout that time, I enlisted in the Army when I was 18. And I ended up spending 24 years in the military, both active duty and reserve, and met my husband at Walter Reed when he was enlisted and I was an officer. And one of my favorite stories is to tell that for those of you who have been in the military, my husband got an Article 15 for dating me, which is a reprimand. So he had to pay a fine. He didn't lose any of his stripes. And now 37, almost 38 years later, he probably wished he would have paid the fine and said goodbye. But now he's been linked to me for 38 years. So we're married, live in Ottumwa, have 2 grown children, one who lives in Chicago, one who lives in Denver, both in the business community.
Thank you so much for that, Congresswoman. It's good just to let our community get to know you a little bit better. I want to turn now to your work since you've been elected to Congress. I know when you're on the campaign trail, and since then you've talked about infrastructure being a top priority of yours. It seems like we're at that point now where it's becoming a reality. What do you think of the president's newly unveiled American Jobs Plan, and what are you looking for in a final infrastructure package?
Well, I have long said that infrastructure is one of those things that would have bipartisan support. It needed to be multi-year. So rather than, a 1 or 2 year plan, it needed to be 5, 7 to 10 year plan. It helps, number one, it helps cities. Number two, it helps states with their Department of Transportation. And more importantly, it helps those contractors to be able to do multi-year plans. So I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for President Biden and his administration to really work across the aisle, to work in a bipartisan fashion. There's tremendous support for this. But, unlike other bills we've already seen come through this administration, especially through the House, there's little appetite for bipartisan work. So this is a $2.3 trillion package. There's already passed a $1.9 trillion package for COVID, of which there's already 100 or almost 1 trillion that's unspent from the previous 5 packages. And so now if this passes, you can think about it in the span of 4 months, we'll have an administration that has passed $4 trillion worth of spending, which is in excess of our GDP. So I'm very supportive of an infrastructure package. But there's only 150 billion in this bill that's actually going to go to roads, bridges, airports, locks and dams, and then another 100 billion on broadband. So to me, very important issue. You're in the Quad Cities. People forget about the locks and dams. They forget how important it is to both our agricultural economy, but also to our manufacturing economy. Less so for recreation, but when you think about the wetlands and the recreational things alongside the river, it's important for recreational and environmental purposes as well. So tremendously important issue that needs to be funded, and it needs to be a multi-year funding. So there are things in the package that I certainly would be supportive of. As I mentioned, roads, bridges, locks and dams. We know Highway 30, we need to have that 4-lane all the way through. And Representative Ashley Hinson and I will be talking to our transportation department about those issues. We know bridges and the locks and dams, and then broadband. Those are all very important issues I think all of us would agree on. And as I said, I think that there could be bipartisan agreement. But when you're adding things into infrastructure, we muddy the language. So when childcare and housing becomes part of infrastructure, that I think then creates difficulties with us passing and getting on board. So I'm hoping that what President Biden has put forth is a guideline, and that there will truly be an avenue for bipartisan work on an infrastructure package.
Sure, absolutely. And you mentioned those 5 separate COVID relief packages that have now been passed dating back to the start of the pandemic. We've seen in recent days reports that funding for PPP may be drying up and that small businesses may have trouble getting that funding. Is there a plan that you've heard of or that you're working on to correct that issue? And what else, if you can, just tell us what's happening in DC that our small businesses should know about?
Well, one of the things that was, I think when you looked at the entire COVID relief package, so we had almost $1 trillion of funds that were not spent. And I listened to this argument on both sides of the aisle. But you have to do that investigation to find out, is there actual monies that are unspent? And so when you're looking at the fact that you had monies that has not yet been expended, and then the current package, there are things that I wholeheartedly agree with and I talked about and I think are valid to put forward, and then things that I don't agree with. So any COVID relief package, regardless of who's putting it forward, regardless of the presidential administration, should be timely, targeted, and temporary. And that's because you anticipate the pandemic, although I will be very honest, I thought it would be more seasonal like the flu when it started last March. I did not anticipate that it would go on for this length of time. just given our experience with other types of viruses. So I'll fully admit to being one of those that what came up short when it came to how long this would last. But we still expect it to be a temporary phenomenon. We don't expect this to go on for years and years and years. And as a matter of fact, my belief is looking at all of the numbers of positive tests, hospitalizations, and deaths that we have rapidly dropped. The report I read yesterday was that the hospitalizations and deaths in the UK are and in Israel down 90% since the vaccine was began to be administered. We're in the tail end of the pandemic. So things that I agreed with were extending the PPP. I was not as enthralled with extending unemployment. There are states that have kept their economies closed and have kept small businesses closed, even though larger businesses have been open, but our state was not one of the ones that did that. Our governor did a very difficult task of balancing the risks of death and sickness from the virus with the risk of shutting down an economy, shutting down schools, shutting down businesses and preventing people from gathering together. And you don't often hear that in the media, but there's a definite risk to what we did. And those risks are significant in delayed diagnosis of cancer, delayed treatment, depression, increased drug addiction, drug overdose, and as we've seen in children, loss of learning, as well as increased depression, mental health, and suicide, even in children as young as 9. So our governor did a very good job of balancing that. And so in the COVID relief package, I think the unemployment benefit, rather than at 400, should have been at 300, which was proposed. I was fine with additional stimulus money going out, but what I hear constantly from employers is they can't get people back to work. So they have a problem getting people to work. Our unemployment rate in Iowa now is around 3%, but functionally it is almost 0 to negative, just because people can't get people to work. So even though I was supportive of those things, they needed to be more temporary. They needed to be short-lived, and it needed to be less so that people could go back to work when their business had, the place that employed them had opened up. The other things I was supportive of certainly is money for vaccine, money for distribution of vaccine, but in the entire $1.9 trillion package, so as a former director of public health, we have a phenomenal local public health, our local public health agencies. And so within that package, there was $50 billion for FEMA, but there was around $7.6 billion for local public health or public health workforce. So when you divide that between 50 states and 7 territories, and it goes through the CDC, then to the state, then down to the local public health agencies, I can tell you from visiting the vaccine clinics and administering vaccines now, I think I'm at, close to 18 counties of our 24 counties in our district. Our local public health agencies do a phenomenal job, especially in rural areas. Now, in the Quad Cities, you have different resources with Genesis, with Scott County Public Health, with the FQHC. So you have these other resources, and you all are doing a phenomenal job too. That was so fun attending the vaccine clinic that was held at the old YMCA. So that was great. I love doing it. But nonetheless, vaccine development, local public health, our public health workforce should have been funded to a greater level. I also, in comments with the COVID-19 task force on Homeland Security, I did not feel we needed to have as much money allocated for testing and contact tracing because we're on the tail end of the pandemic. So there's money that could have been shifted into public health workforce and was not. So the other things that were in the COVID-19 package, I did not agree with. And this is something that I think is business related. One was the $15 minimum wage. And businesses know how much it takes to attract employee. I've had my name on the front of a paycheck and had my name signed on the back of a paycheck. So I've done both of those. And for the government to arbitrarily set what a minimum wage is, when they're not the person that employs, they don't know how much do you have to sell a product or a service for in order to be able to stay in business. I thought that was inappropriate. In addition to which, all the businesses I talked to, most all of them are paying more than what the federal minimum wage is now. They just can't attract employees. And as I said earlier, it's a tough place to be. There was also $170 billion for schools. And Ashley Henson had a great bill to tie that to reopening. I asked for monies to be reserved for mental health services. And those were amendments that were voted down. And we had still almost 60 billion from the previous COVID packages for schools that had not yet even been allocated or spent. So you're trying to tie all this together, and I think there were, and money's not being spent until 2023, or certainly not COVID related. The other thing of which I had some disagreement was in a presumption for longshoremen and people that work at ports and docks. And although this isn't necessarily Iowa related, it was a presumption that if they got COVID-19, they got it from their workplace. So all the workmen's compensation, survivor benefits, all of that went into place, which is a tremendous cost to our businesses. But it doesn't look at, where did a person actually contract COVID-19? It was presumed it was at their workplace. And I have tremendous problems with that. And I wanted to tie it to, if a workplace offered a COVID-19 vaccine and an employee refused to get it, then should that employee be eligible to get a presumption of having contracted COVID-19 at their workplace? So those are the kinds of things in the COVID-19 package that I think were difficult to be on board with, although there was a core subset at about $600 billion there could have been bipartisan agreement on, which meant to help small businesses which needed the help, individuals who still weren't employed and didn't have jobs, testing that needed to be done, vaccine development and vaccine administration. Was very supportive of those things. But as I said, the package was much beyond those small items.
Right, absolutely. And, we hear those workforce issues all the time from our employers. They're not telling us that they can't find anybody to work. It's, since COVID, people aren't willing to come back necessarily right away, or just that the workforce isn't there. So I'm glad you understand that. And I think we can work together on that in the future. You also talked about being at the tail end of the pandemic and kind of vaccines now rolling out. It's been really interesting to see you not only meeting with constituents, but also vaccinating them at the same time. I assume that's got to be a very cool and unique opportunity. There's probably not a whole lot of people who can perform that dual role. Can you talk about that just a little bit, and how being a doctor kind of guides what you do in the U.S. House of Representatives?
Well, probably one of the most fun things I've done since I've been in Congress was when we started having the advent of vaccines. So our first couple of months, our schedule changed every single week. So we would be trying to set up our district events, and we would be called back to Washington for votes. So we continually had to change all of this. And Aaron McKay, you may see him in the Quad City area later today, welcoming home a National Guard troop while I'm in Wapello at a solar installation. So Aaron McKay is our district director. Our office will be in the U.S. Bank building in Davenport. It's on the 7th floor. It's across the hall from Senator Grassley's office. So we're very fortunate to be able to have our office, and we're still trying to get the federal government to approve everything so we can actually start moving in, which that has been a cumbersome process. But so when we were setting up our events, there was a day that there was going to be a vaccine event in Wapello County, and I still have relations with the Wapello County chair, but also within my Senate district, the directors of various county clinics, just from one being their senator, and then number two because I was a former director. And so I had been conversing with them, and they were going to have a workplace vaccination site at JBS, which is a pork processing plant. And so I was helping them because they were getting access to J&J, which is a one-shot vaccine. And the Department of Public Health wanted them to move up the date, but you can understand in that facility, there's 30 different languages. They were getting the consents done ahead of time with interpreters. So it wasn't possible to move it up. So I got involved in this and trying to get access to the vaccine. And ultimately what they did was a local pharmacist in Bloomfield was able to use their federal contract and get the J&J for this facility. We were supposed to be voting, but we finished up on Thursday night. I was able to get home about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then remembered that they were having the vaccine site, which I didn't think I'd be able to attend. Was very excited that I could go. They did a phenomenal job between the human resources, JBS, the County Medical Society, volunteers who came in. And so it asked if I could administer vaccines. I still have an active license, my active drug license and DEA license. And so they let me do it, but it was just so rewarding. I cannot tell you how much celebration, how much joy. It's something I tremendously enjoy doing. And then the first person I vaccinated whispered to me afterward. I went back to check on him, and he whispered to me, "Oh, by the way, I voted for you." And so it was just so sweet that that he was getting his vaccine administered by someone who he had voted for and who was also his representative. But more importantly than that, it's one thing to see elected leaders get the vaccination themselves. It's totally another to be able to spend the time and energy to administer it. And like everybody else, I want this pandemic over. I'm tired of wearing a mask. It's hard to breathe when I go upstairs. I'm, not see anybody's smiles, for people not to have spent time with their loved ones before their deaths, not to be able to get together with people or meet in a fashion. For me, I'm a visual learner, so I like seeing people. I like to look them in the eye. I like to meet with them. I remember better when I can visually, put a name and a face together, and or a facility or a business. So all of us want the pandemic to be over. And to me, this is the fastest way to do that. So whatever I can do to facilitate that, then, we had to make a decision. Do we do vaccine clinics in all the 24 counties, or do we do a town hall? So we're doing vaccine clinics, but also meeting with businesses, meeting with constituents, and Zoom conferences are thrown in between.
Absolutely. And before I get to some of the audience questions, in the spirit of, moving past COVID, I know you're also a member of the House Education and Labor Committee. Can you explain the work that you and your colleagues do on that committee to benefit job creators, and maybe some of the bills or things that you've seen since joining that committee that have already come before you and that you guys are talking about?
So some of the things that we're doing in education labor, our first thing was the markup on the COVID-19 bill. And then we had bills on the Dreamers and on immigration. These were not things that went through the committee, so there was not a lot of opportunity for input in those. It was something that had they not added in additional amnesty in the Dreamers, it would have been something that I was very supportive and would have voted for. But when they expanded it to not people who had been in the country for at least 5 or 6 years through no fault of their own, to anybody that arrived in the country by January 1st of this year under age 19, it's things that are done that make it difficult to get bipartisan support. But immigration is one of those things that we would look at. There's, a lot of the things that are coming out currently are related to bills that had passed through the House before, could not pass through the Senate, and they're being recirculated. And honestly, they're not necessarily business-friendly bills. So I've reached out to the business community actually on several of these. One was the $15 minimum wage. I actually contacted people throughout the district to find out how that would affect their district. Most of them were already paying above it, but above the federal minimum wage, and even above the $15 an hour. But again, their issue is getting people to work, not necessarily having a floor. So they didn't necessarily agree with it, but it was not going to affect their business. Other things like the COVID-19, sexual harassment in the workplace. There's a lot that we're dealing with gender equity, diversity in the workplace. And then some of the things on clean energy and clean environment and how that affects the workplace. Many of these things put some additional burdens both on cost and regulation on the businesses. So for me, it's very helpful to be able to have businesses to reach out to me. Eliminating the Right to Work Act, that's a non-starter for me in Iowa. It's not something that I'm going to support legislation that would eliminate Iowa's right to work laws. And I do realize that we have companies in the Quad Cities. We're both in Illinois and in Iowa. But I think I'm in Iowa. I'm in the 2nd district of Iowa, and I'm going to support what's good for Iowa businesses.
Absolutely. I want to get to now a few questions from the audience. We've had a couple about, how do you think the two parties in DC can come together and not necessarily agree on everything, but do a better job of working together? And I know you consider yourself a realist. As part of being a realist, saying, I'm willing to work with people across the aisle to make sure, like you said, I'm doing what's best for Iowa's 2nd district.
So there's already legislation that I voted for that not all of my colleagues voted for. So one was the Violence Against Women's Act. There are definitely things within that bill that I did not agree with. But I certainly wanted to make the statement and my support for women in abusive situations, our domestic violence shelters. And so I contacted my colleagues to find out what they felt about it, what they were going to do, and then also what I was going to do, and hoping that there are things that in the bill that I do not like, that hoping that Senator Ernst will be able to change some of. I also have quite a number of legislation that we've just put out that is bipartisan, and I have a Democrat and I co-sponsoring that. A lot of this is in relationship to veterans bills, one on prevention of suicide. We just put forth another bill with Representative Trone on dump opioids to allow drop boxes. So in Iowa, we have the ability to do that for unused drugs, maybe at the death of a parent, or you don't need them, especially when they're opioids, to be able to dispense those. And we have a day every year that, all of those medications and drugs can be collected by our pharmacies. So we're trying to do the same thing at the VA hospital to be able to have a site where these medications can be dispensed rather than being put down in the toilet, into our water, or into a landfill. So we have that bill. We have a bill with Representative Kai Kahale, who is from Hawaii. He's the first representative ever from the Big Island of Hawaii. He's also a military veteran. And so this is a bill on the Vet Tech program. So it's a program, it's actually a pilot program, which started out at less than $15 million. It was so popular that they expanded it to 45 million. And we're asking for an expansion to 125 million. And so this is a short time program to train veterans in technology skill sets that allows them to be employed in the technology sector. And even though the program's only a little over 2 years old, 1,500 veterans have already passed through the 6-month program at an average salary of $62,000 a year. So a very successful program. We're working together. We just met with community colleges. We had a Zoom conference yesterday looking at how we can do training for in high school, educational training with community college and high schools to get young people, to get them aware of the opportunities that exist for them in trades and that don't require a 4-year degree. So this is something I know many of the businesses in your area in the Quad Cities have worked with the community colleges. I know Kirkwood, Indian Hill, Southeast. They have these variety of programs. There is concurrent enrollment in Iowa, but if students don't know what's available, then they don't choose to go in that career pathway. So we're talking about what we can do to be able to further that pilot program here in the state of Iowa. We also had other bills on veterans issues, and then we've got some healthcare issues. I am doing a bill with Senator Joni Ernst, so we already have support in the other chamber on Waters of the U.S. Act. So that's important for agriculture, but it's also important for manufacturing.
Absolutely. And you hit on a couple of our goals there of getting our young people to stay here and learning about the opportunities they have. So appreciate you understanding that that's a goal for everybody around here. It helps our employers, helps our young folks stay more involved. So again, that's great. We've got a few more questions here, and I'll try to get to all of them for our attendees. We've had a couple questions about the Rock Island Arsenal. Obviously, it's a huge employer for the Quad Cities. It's a significant economic driver. Have you had a chance to meet with leadership from the Arsenal or visit the island yet? And what have you seen in Congress, and what can you do to ensure that the Arsenal remains strong over the next few years?
So maybe I give too lengthy answers, so I'll try to shorten them. So I've not yet had the opportunity to meet with Rock Island Arsenal. I have met with Corps of Engineers on Rock Island about locks and dams issues and what we need to go forward there. But I will be meeting with them. And then certainly on the Veterans Committee, speaking with Mike Voss, who's the ranking member, about issues that we need. So I will be meeting with Rock Island Arsenal. It's something that my district director, Aaron McKay, will set up. As soon as we get our office set up where we can actually start, facilitating some of these meetings, you'll probably be seeing a lot more of me in the Quad Cities.
Well, we're very happy to hear that. We also had some questions after we talked about the infrastructure package. In the Quad Cities, we've talked for a long time about passenger rail and trying to get it to the Quad Cities here. Now we see Amtrak has released a new map that also wants to expand to Iowa City. Do you see that infrastructure package having money for Amtrak and kind of rail like that, or specific to the 2nd District? I don't know if you've had conversations about that yet, but do you think that could be a part of it?
So there is within the infrastructure package, from what I've seen, there is funding and expensive for support of Amtrak and high-speed rail. I have not seen specifics on where they're allocating and what they're doing. So I think that is still, to me, I don't know. It doesn't mean it's not in there. I'm not this time.
I'm going to try my best to summarize for you too, so we can get through a few more of these. We had a question submitted ahead of time. I'll cut to the chase here. Basically, do you support kind of tax credits for new solar installations that would support small businesses? I know you've talked about energy and wind and solar before. Maybe just give your brief overview of where you stand on solar and if tax credits could be viable for that.
So I think it's appropriate to extend the tax credits, but because of the tax credits, it has allowed wind to become more prevalent, wind and solar to become more prevalent. But I do think there's a point in time at which we have to have a hard stop. So wind and solar, because of subsidies, are more economical. How much more economical they'll be when the subsidies are removed, that's unknown. Now, wind and solar should have the same business depreciation, the same business tax provisions that other types of energy sources do. But it's so supportive. I have three in my Senate district, had three installations in Fairfield and Jefferson County. So support the credits going forward. But I also think that we need to be very cognizant of what goes into solar panels and what happens with wind blades. So there are environmental issues that we have not yet addressed. Also, rare earth elements which go into solar panels are mined in China, which has bad labor practices and bad environmental practices. You could have mining for rare earth elements in the United States. So that's one of the things we have to look at. And then I think we also have to have research and development that goes into other sources of energy, which if we continue tax credits and we continue to push in one direction, we're missing opportunities in another direction. To me, information and knowledge is not stagnant, it's dynamic. So we continue to learn. And so, about 20 years ago, there was a focus on hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells, and that sort of went by the wayside, but I really see that coming back. And when I visited with, our solar installers, Ideal in Jefferson County in Fairfield, we also went to visit their solar array for the cities and at Maharishi University, and then at some of the agricultural facilities, their Tesla batteries, which still battery storage is an issue, but then also started talking about hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells. So that may be something that makes a comeback. So when we're looking at an infrastructure bill that's putting a lot of money into charging stations for electric vehicles, that may not be the carbon neutral vehicle of the future. So I think we need to be cautious and continue to research and development into other environmentally friendly energy sources. So I'm all of the above. And as we want to get to carbon neutral, I think that we need, number one, we know our agricultural economy helps with that. Number two, we need to continue research and development. And my personal view is that wind and solar will not be the energy of the future. We need to look more at nuclear. We've lost a lot of our nuclear engineering capability. If you've never, I've had the opportunity 10 years ago to visit Duane Arnold nuclear energy plant in Palo. Phenomenal. They're more clean than any hospital I have ever been in. So, but that is technology that they're very concerned that we're going to lose that engineering capacity, that informational knowledge. And we know that small reactors can be very safe, carbon neutral, and they can be very cost effective, but regulatory practices have made them not as competitive as other sources of energy.
Great, thank you. I think we've gotten through just about all of them. I know the other big topic that we've seen a lot of, and I know your colleague, Representative Hinson, was down on the border. Could you, I know this is a large topic and it's not easy as we're running out of time here to summarize, but what do you think needs to be done to address the current immigration challenges? Is there kind of a plan that's already developed? Is anything happening in DC yet, or kind of just your personal opinion on where we should go to solve the issues at the border?
So I did make a trip to the border with Representative McCarthy, and then interestingly enough, so that was to the El Paso section, and on Sunday I'll leave to go with Homeland Security, and Representative John Katko will go to McAllen to that part of the border. And, having grown up in Texas kind of back and forth with my dad in the military, it has long been an issue, but it has become a tremendously more pervasive issue. I mean, when you think about it, when I went to the border, when we were there in February, 104,000 people came across the border illegally. Our legal immigration system has 1 million people a year. So if you just extrapolated that, the biggest time is April and May. If you're having 100,000 people come across the border illegally, processed through a facility, that's not the ones that we don't know crossing. I mean, there are people that are detected but not apprehended. These are the ones that we know that we're processing through. That you will have more people come across the border illegally this year than legally. So what happens? Where's the fairness to all those people who have been waiting in line, waiting years in order to come to this country legally? Or for those individuals who are in this country trying to become citizens of our country because our immigration system is not efficient, and it doesn't do a good job of tracking people that are here and getting people to citizenship. It should not take 10, 12 years to become a citizen of this great country. So the border problem is a huge issue. It is a crisis at the border. It is something that the administration has not recognized. They certainly should have been aware. And when we visited with the Border Patrol agents, they told us they made the administration aware. They stopped production of the border wall that was already funded. 17 miles of it was already funded to be produced. And it's not just the barrier. There's a whole lot of technology that assists the agents that goes into the newer border wall. So that's technology for underground trimmer detection, that's video surveillance, that's temperature surveillance. All of that technology helps them to detect people. They also informed us that people on the terror watch list were coming across the border, excuse me, and drugs. So the week we were there, they had a huge cache of fentanyl that they had confiscated coming across the border. So this is a huge problem. I read last night from the Washington Post, March, 175,000 people coming across the border illegally. They're not being tested for COVID-19. They are brought into communities. The communities may not have any knowledge that these individuals are coming. And when you have communities and cities who have already been stressed in the pandemic with unemployment, closing businesses, just trying to get individuals vaccinated, and then you have a big influx of migrants coming in that the mayor may not even know until hours before they arrive, it's definitely a huge problem. I put forth a bill to require testing of migrants that are coming across that are processed in the facility. That was voted down, so we're not doing testing. Secretary Mayorkas said that, well, they're going to be tested. We require testing, but they don't require testing until they get to their end facility. I also read in the Washington Post yesterday that HHS is spending $60 million a week on processing the unaccompanied minors and the families. $60 million a week. And when we think of what happens with $60 million a week and where that money could be spent, this is a problem, and it's a problem of the administration's own making. We know that we need workers. We know that we need legal immigration. We know that we need a guest worker system, but the majority of people in the United States are not for amnesty for every illegal immigrant or for illegal immigrants to keep coming across at a time, when they're still trying to get back to work and their communities to resolve. The other thing the Border Patrol agents and the Border Patrol Union told us that the policies of the previous administration worked. They said they worked very well. They were very effective, that they had more order at the border, a more orderly process. The facility we visited in El Paso had just been built a little over a year ago. It had the capacity for 1,040 individuals. They never thought they would reach capacity. They reached capacity the day that we were there. So that tells you how much there's disorder at the border from executive order. And this is something that it could have been done in a bipartisan process.
Great, thank you for that answer. I know it's a tough topic to get through in 3 or 4 minutes, but thanks for summarizing your thoughts. And thanks again for spending some time with us this morning. Before I let you go, it was great to see you at the Machine Shed last week. Are there any other Quad City favorites that every time you're here, you want to stop by? Anything that is near and dear to your heart in the Quad Cities?
Oh gosh, you're trying to get my secrets out of me. Whitey's.
Yep, that's an easy answer. Everybody knows to go to that. It's a staple, so you won't get any detractors from that, I don't think. I would recommend Country Style too. If you're going to be getting some ice cream, Country Style is also great.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your having me on. I look forward to meeting with all of you all in the near future. Please have me back, and please feel free to reach out to our offices. I think you've got Austin. He's my scheduler. But certainly individuals should feel free to reach out to us. There are different reasons that people go into office. My reason is to promote Iowa and to make Iowa the best place to live, work, and raise a family and own a business.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you everyone who joined us today. For all of our attendees, you'll get an email from the Chamber asking you to take a quick one-minute survey after this. Lets us know how we're doing, and you'll be entered to win a $25 gift card. Thanks again, as always, to our annual sponsors, AM General LLC, Arconic, Exelon Generation, and Stanley Consultants. We hope you'll join us for our next legislative series event, which will be on Friday, April 23rd at 9 a.m. As always, you can register at thequadcitieschamber.com. Until then, thanks for spending your morning with us, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you.